single mom hired to bathe a bitter millionaire. But the man in the wheelchair changed her life forever. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The morning air was brisk, heavy, with the silence of a neighborhood still asleep. Emily Carson tightened her coat around her slender frame as she stepped out of the modest duplex she and her son had called home for the past 2 years. With one hand, she clutched her worn-out purse, and with the other, she adjusted the collar of her blouse. She had just enough time to drop off her son at Mrs. Kennedy's, the retired neighbor who had become family, before heading to what she hoped would be the opportunity she had prayed for. 35 years old and already weathered by life, Emily had learned to carry the world on her shoulders without letting it show. Her son, Ethan, was 7, a bright boy with boundless curiosity and a heart far bigger than their budget. She had spent the last 6 months bouncing between temp jobs and night shifts, anything to keep the lights on and food on the table. But she was tired of scraping by, tired of watching Ethan pretend he wasn't hungry, and tired of pretending she was okay. The flyer had come unexpectedly. Slipped under her door one evening, its gold-embossed letters seemed too extravagant for her small kitchen table. Private caregiver needed, competitive pay, discretion required, immediate start. The contact number was handwritten, and something about it felt oddly personal. Emily called the next morning, her voice trembling with uncertainty. A woman with a clipped accent answered. "The interview is today, 11 a.m. Don't be late." No name, no address, just a pin drop sent to her phone. Against every cautious instinct she had, Emily chose to follow it. Desperation has a way of muting doubt. She arrived at the estate just before 11, nerves curled tight in her stomach. The iron gate that opened before her looked like it belonged in a movie. The driveway wound through manicured trees, leading to a stone mansion that seemed to hold secrets in its silence. A woman in her 50s stood waiting at the front door. Tall, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun, she wore the kind of uniform that spoke of long service and few words. "You must be Miss Carson," the woman said, not unkindly. "I'm Margaret. I run the household." Emily nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me." Margaret studied her for a moment. "Follow me." The inside of the mansion was just as pristine as its exterior, polished floors, grand staircases, art lining the walls. But there was no warmth. The air felt hollow, as though life had once thrived here, but had long since moved out. She was led down a quiet hallway to a study where a man sat behind a massive oak desk, his back to the door, wheelchair wheels just visible beneath the high-backed chair. "Mr. Callahan," Margaret said gently. "The applicant is here." He didn't turn around. Let her sit. Emily obeyed, perching at the edge of the leather chair across from him. There was a pause, then a low, gravelly voice. "Do you know what this job entails?" "Not entirely," Emily admitted, straightening, "but I'm willing to learn. I have some experience with caregiving, and I'm very—" "You'll be responsible for my morning routine," he interrupted. "Bathing, dressing, administering medications, and staying out of my business. You'll keep to your duties, keep your opinions to yourself, and keep your eyes on the clock." Emily blinked. "Understood." Another silence followed. Then he turned. Liam Callahan. Early 40s, once striking in a way that suggested power more than charm. Now, his appearance bore the heaviness of bitterness. He was still handsome. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair peppered with silver, but his expression was distant, eyes shadowed by a pain that ran deeper than injury. "I don't tolerate incompetence," he said, watching her carefully. "You'll start tomorrow, 7 sharp." Emily nodded, masking the mixture of fear and hope rising in her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." On her way out, Margaret walked her to the gate. "He's not an easy man," Margaret said quietly. "And that job, it breaks people." Emily looked at the mansion, then at the picture of Ethan on her phone screen. "I don't have the luxury of breaking." That night, Emily stood by Ethan's bed as he hugged his stuffed bear. "Will this job be better, Mom?" he asked, eyes wide with hope no child should have to carry. She smiled, brushing his hair back. "I think so, sweetheart." "Will we have pancakes again?" Emily nodded. "One day very soon." He grinned and snuggled into his pillow. Emily watched him until his breathing evened out, then stepped into the hallway, exhaling a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The next morning, she arrived before 7. Margaret let her in with a quiet nod. "He's waiting." She made her way to Mr. Callahan's private suite. He was already in his chair, dressed in a dark robe, eyes locked on the window. He didn't look at her. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. Emily moved carefully, respectfully, guiding him through the routine. The silence between them was thick. She noticed his hands, scarred, tense. The muscles in his jaw flexed each time she adjusted the water or reached for a towel. There was something deeper in him. Anger, yes, but also grief. "Do you need help with the bench?" she asked softly. "I'm not helpless," he snapped. "I know." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Most people look at me like I'm broken." Emily handed him the towel. "You're not the only one who's ever been broken, Mr. Callahan. Some of us just carry it in places no one sees." He didn't respond, but for the first time, he met her eyes. And something, a flicker, a breath, shifted between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but that moment would be the beginning of everything that came next. The next few days followed a rhythm that Emily quickly learned to navigate. Arrive before sunrise, help Mr. Callahan through his carefully measured routine, avoid missteps, and speak only when necessary. He rarely acknowledged her presence beyond sharp directives and gruff nods, but she could feel his eyes watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, like he was waiting for her to mess up, to leave like others before her. But Emily didn't flinch. Not once. Not when he snapped. Not when he ignored her. And certainly not when he made it clear he didn't need anyone's pity. She wasn't there for pity, hers or his. On the 4th morning, as she folded one of the plush towels and placed it neatly on the rack, Mr. Callahan's voice broke the silence. "You're still here," he said, not looking up from his book. Emily blinked. "Yes, sir." "No one lasts a week in this role." She paused, then continued folding. Maybe they didn't have a reason to stay. He glanced at her then, the faintest tilt of his brow betraying curiosity. "And you do?" Emily nodded quietly. "I do." He didn't ask her to explain, but something softened in his expression before he turned away. That afternoon, Margaret stopped Emily in the hallway outside the linen closet. "You're doing well," she said, her voice low but sincere. "He may never say it, but he's noticed. He always does." Emily exhaled slowly. relief washing over her like a tide. I wasn't sure. He's guarded. He's been hurt, Margaret said, glancing toward the closed door of the study. Not just his body, his trust, too. He doesn't believe in people anymore. Emily nodded. I've known what that feels like. Later that evening, back at home, Emily tucked Ethan into bed. He clutched the drawing he'd made, stick figures holding hands in front of a giant house with a garden and a wheelchair beside a smiling sun. Is this your new work, Mommy? Emily laughed softly. Yes, that's the house. And is the man nice? She hesitated. Not exactly, but I think he's someone who forgot how to smile. Ethan frowned. Maybe you can remind him. She kissed his forehead. Maybe. The next morning, the sky was gray and the air cold, a drizzle dusting the hedges as Emily arrived. Mr. Callahan was in the library, unusually alert, thumbing through a worn journal with a leather cover. She waited by the door until he noticed her. Don't you knock? He asked. You left the door open. He said nothing, just gestured for her to come in. She stepped closer and saw a photograph lying on the desk beside the journal. A younger version of him, standing with a woman in a pale blue dress, sunlight splashing across their faces. The woman had a smile that seemed effortless, full of life. Your wife? She asked before she could stop herself. He stared at the photo for a beat longer, then closed the journal. She left after the accident, he said simply, his voice a shade darker than usual. Emily's breath caught. I'm sorry. Don't be. She wasn't built for wheelchairs or slow days. Said she wanted to remember me the way I was. There was no emotion in his words, but Emily could feel the wound beneath them. She must have forgotten who you still are, Emily said softly. He met her gaze again, and for the first time, something in his eyes shimmered. Not vulnerability, not quite, but recognition, like he saw her differently now. You're very sure of yourself, he said. Emily smiled gently. Not really. I've just learned not to be afraid of pain. It teaches us what matters. He leaned back in his chair, watching her in silence. You sound like someone who's lost things. I have, she replied, without flinching. But I haven't lost myself. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain tapping gently against the tall windows. Finally, he said, Tomorrow, you'll help me in the gym. Emily blinked. Sir? The physical therapy room. You'll assist. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir, she said. When she stepped out of the study, Margaret was waiting down the hall. He's letting you in, she said quietly. Emily turned to her, surprised. What do you mean? That gym. He hasn't let anyone help him there in months. That evening, as Emily walked home in the light rain, she pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the tree-lined sidewalk, the lights glowing through the mist. She sent it to Ethan with a simple message. Even rainy days can lead to something beautiful. Sleep well, my brave boy. She didn't know yet how the next day would unfold, but she felt it in her bones. Something was shifting, not just in him, in her too. And neither of them was ready for what that shift would mean. The morning sun filtered weakly through the lace curtains of the Callahan estate, casting muted gold shadows across the marble floor. Emily arrived earlier than usual, her heart humming with anticipation and something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Today would be different. She could sense it. Margaret met her in the hallway, holding a neatly folded towel and a knowing smile. "He's waiting for you in the therapy room," she said, "and he hasn't been in there well, since before he gave up trying." Emily nodded, taking the towel from her. "Thanks for the warning." "You're not scared?" "Terrified," she said, managing a small laugh. "But I've faced worse. And so has he." When she entered the therapy room, it was quiet, almost reverent in its stillness. The walls were lined with mirrors and minimal equipment. Parallel bars gleamed beneath the skylight, and a single rowing machine sat in the corner, unused. Mr. Callahan was already there, parked at the foot of the bars. He looked up, his face unreadable. "You're on time," he said. "You told me to be," Emily replied, standing straight. She didn't want to meet his challenges with meekness. She was learning that what he respected most was resilience. "I don't like being pushed," he warned. "I don't plan on pushing you. I'm just here if you need me." He paused, then nodded toward the bars. "Let's get on with it." Emily moved beside him, carefully locking the wheels of his chair. She held her breath as he placed both hands on the cold metal, bracing himself. His arms trembled slightly as he hoisted his torso forward, the muscles in his neck tightening with strain. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, inch by inch, he managed to lift himself from the chair. Emily didn't reach out unless he asked. She had learned quickly that his dignity mattered as much as his strength. His feet never moved, but he stood, barely, suspended by willpower and sheer force. His breath was ragged, his hands white-knuckled. Then, with a soft grunt, he eased himself back down. He didn't say a word, just stared at the floor like it had spoken some great truth he wasn't ready to hear. "That was a start," Emily said gently. "No, that was pathetic." Emily crossed her arms. "What would you call it if Ethan stood for the first time after a bad fall?" He looked up sharply at the mention of her son. "You'd cheer for him," she said. "So that's what I'm doing." He didn't respond, but his lips thinned, and his jaw worked like he was chewing over the idea. "I was a triathlete before," he said after a long silence. "Ran marathons, climbed Kilimanjaro. Now I'm celebrating just standing." Emily moved closer, kneeling slightly to meet his eye level. "You don't have to measure who you are now by who you were. That man climbed mountains. This one? He's learning how to build new ones." He studied her for a beat, then looked away. "You sound like a Hallmark card." She smiled. "Maybe. But you stood up, Mr. Callahan, and I was honored to witness it." He said nothing more. But when she reached for his water bottle, he didn't stop her. That was progress. Later that day, as Emily finished reorganizing the linen closet, she received a call from Ethan. "Mommy!" His excited voice crackled through the receiver. "I made a card for Mr. Callahan. It's got a mountain and two stick people climbing it. One's him and one's you." Emily chuckled. Her heart warmed. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I'll give it to him." "Will he like it?" Emily paused. "I think maybe it'll mean more to him than he knows." She printed out the drawing that evening from her phone and placed it in a clean envelope. A small gesture, but one she felt mattered. The next morning, she left the envelope on Mr. Callahan's tray beside his coffee. He didn't open it at first, but later, while she was prepping the garden wheelchair ramp, Margaret found her with raised brows. "He kept that card," she whispered. "Didn't say anything, just slipped it into his journal." Emily smiled, feeling a flicker of warmth ripple through her chest. In the following days, the therapy sessions became a quiet ritual. Mr. Callahan didn't resist anymore. He allowed Emily to assist, even asked her opinion about how to adjust his grip or how long he should hold each stand. He never thanked her, but she didn't need the words. The way he showed up, how his efforts grew bolder each morning, was all the proof she needed. One afternoon, as they rested after a session, he broke the silence. "What do you dream about, Emily?" She looked at him, surprised. He'd never asked a personal question. "My son's future," she replied without hesitation. "A life where he doesn't have to choose between electricity and dinner, where he feels safe." He nodded slowly. "I lost my daughter years ago." The words fell like stones between them. "I didn't know," Emily said softly. "She was 10, drunk driver. That's when things started to break." She watched him closely. "And your wife?" "She drifted. We both did. Grief pulls people in different directions." He closed his eyes for a moment, and Emily said nothing, letting the silence hold the weight. "I never got to say goodbye," he whispered, "to either of them." "You still can," she said, "in the choices you make now, in the way you live." Mr. Callahan opened his eyes, meeting hers. And for once, there was no shield, no distance, just a man who had known heartbreak and was starting to believe he could rise from it. He nodded. "Maybe that's why you're here." Emily's voice was steady. "Maybe that's why we both are." The sky over the Callahan estate was heavy with thick clouds, casting a soft gray hue over the garden paths and hedges. Rain threatened from the horizon, but inside the house, something far more fragile than weather was shifting. Trust. Emily arrived that morning with her usual quiet focus, but beneath her steady composure was the echo of last night's conversation with Mr. Callahan. He had opened a part of himself she hadn't expected, a sliver of his past, the pain of loss, the truth about the daughter he never got to say goodbye to. And now she couldn't unsee it. It wasn't just about bathing and dressing anymore. It was about healing. As she entered the therapy room, she found him already waiting, which was unusual. He was often late by a few minutes, insisting on preparing alone, holding on to fragments of independence. But today, he was early, ready. She offered a soft, "Good morning," and he nodded in return. Not curt, not cold, simply quiet. They began the session in silence. Emily adjusted the bars. Mr. Callahan steadied his grip, and then, as he began to lift himself, he said, "Her name was Lily." Emily looked at him. He didn't meet her eyes, just stared ahead. "My daughter, Lily. She was the wild one, the kind who wore mismatched socks on purpose, who sang off key just to make us laugh." There was a tremble in his voice, barely there. Emily didn't speak. She simply listened. "I remember thinking that I had all the time in the world," he continued, "that I'd be there to watch her grow up, walk her down the aisle, meet her kids one day." He lifted himself higher than before. His arms quivered under the strain, but he didn't falter. "I never got to do any of it." He lowered himself slowly, breathing hard. "She'd be 20 now," he murmured. "Would have loved to meet your Ethan." Emily blinked rapidly, her throat tight. "She would have had to compete for best drawing," she whispered, smiling through the lump in her chest. Mr. Callahan let out a small, hollow laugh. I think she would have liked that. Later that day, Emily found a moment of quiet on the back terrace, sipping tea as the rain finally began to fall. Margaret joined her, holding a folded towel and wearing her usual watchful expression. "You've softened him," she said. Emily raised an eyebrow. "He's still pretty solid." "No, I mean, not his body, his heart." Emily looked out at the garden, the rain dancing across the stone path. "I don't know. Maybe he was never hard to begin with. Just broken." Margaret nodded. "That's the thing with grief. It doesn't make people cruel. It makes them afraid to feel again." Emily sighed. "I just hope I'm not overstepping. I came here to help him bathe and dress, not rebuild his spirit." Margaret gave a knowing smile. Sometimes helping someone stand up again means more than just using your hands. It means showing them why they should. Later that evening, a thunderclap echoed through the house, rattling the windows. Emily was in the library, organizing books when she heard a sharp voice. I knew it. It was Veronica, Arthur Callahan's sister. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. A woman of severe lines and polished restraint, Veronica had visited the estate only a handful of times since Emily started. But when she appeared, her presence rippled through the house like a cold front. "You've managed to worm your way in nicely," Veronica said. "I was told you were a caregiver, not a confidant." Emily stood tall. "I'm here to help your brother. That's all." Veronica's eyes flickered. "Help him? Or manipulate him? He's vulnerable. He needs protection, not company. I protect his dignity, his choices, and I've never asked for anything from him." Veronica stepped forward, her tone sharp. "My brother has always been susceptible to emotional distractions. I won't allow that again. Not after what happened with his wife." Emily stiffened. "I'm not your brother's wife. I'm his caregiver and his friend." "That's even worse," Veronica spat, "because he might actually trust you." She turned on her heel and left, her heels echoing sharply down the marble hallway. Emily stood in silence, heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she was angry or hurt, perhaps both, but she knew one thing. Arthur deserved better than a life locked behind cold walls and sharper tongues. The next morning, Arthur didn't come to therapy. Emily waited in the room, uncertain, before deciding to find him. She knocked on the door to his study, something she'd never done before. When there was no answer, she opened it gently. He was inside, seated in his chair, staring at the rain through the window. "I heard Veronica came by," he said, without turning. She did. "She never approved of my decisions, especially not the ones made with my heart." Emily stepped closer. "You're allowed to choose who you trust." Arthur finally turned to her. "She thinks you're here to use me." "I'm not." "I know that," he said quietly. Silence stretched between them. "I didn't come here to become part of your life," Emily continued. "I came to earn enough to keep Ethan safe, to pay rent, to keep the lights on. But somewhere in the middle of all that, I started caring about you." Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "Do you want to leave?" She shook her head. "No." "Then don't." He reached into the side drawer of his desk and pulled out Ethan's drawing, the one with the stick figures climbing the mountain. "She gave you this?" "Yes." "It's the only mountain I've been willing to climb since the accident." Emily smiled. "And you're halfway up." Arthur looked out the window again. "Let's keep climbing." The sky was clearing. After 3 days of steady rain, the sun had finally broken through the clouds, warming the stone paths and glass windows of the Callahan estate. But inside, the air still held the quiet weight of change. Arthur Callahan's world had been a place of stillness and silence for so long that even the gentlest shift felt like a tremor. Yet now, with each word exchanged between him and Emily, with every step he dared to try in the therapy room, a kind of movement had begun, not just physical, but emotional. Something real was unfolding, and it terrified him more than any fall ever could. That morning, Emily entered the therapy room to find Arthur already seated at the parallel bars. His hands rested on the armrests of his wheelchair, eyes fixed forward, jaw set. "I want to try something different today," he said before she could greet him. Emily set her clipboard down and approached him cautiously. "All right. What are you thinking?" He gestured to the braces and support harness. "Let's see how far I can walk. No more just standing. I want to move." Emily hesitated, then nodded. "We'll go slow, but I'll be right here." It took 10 minutes to get him set up, body trembling with anticipation, fear, and something else, purpose. As he took hold of the bars, Emily stood just beside him, one hand ready to steady his back, the other prepared to catch his fall if needed. His first step was hesitant, a small shift of weight, a movement of the left leg. But it happened. A step, then another. And then, his body gave way, knees buckling. Emily caught him quickly, gently easing him back into the chair. He was breathing hard, sweat lining his forehead, but his eyes were bright. "I did it," he whispered, astonished. "You did," Emily said softly, kneeling beside him. "And tomorrow you'll do even more." Arthur reached for a towel and wiped his brow. "You know what I realized just now?" "What?" "That failure isn't the opposite of progress. It's part of it." Emily smiled, her chest tightening. "That's a lesson I've had to learn, too." They shared a look, one that said everything their words hadn't. Later that day, as Emily folded laundry in the upstairs guest room, she heard a light knock on the door. Margaret entered, holding a tray with 2 cups of tea. "You look like you could use this," the housekeeper said, setting the tray down. Emily chuckled. "You always know." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, sighing. "I saw Mr. Callahan in the garden, smiling." "He took his first steps today," Emily said, pride evident in her voice. Margaret raised her brows. "Well, if that's not a miracle, I don't know what is." "It's more than just the physical part," Emily said after a moment. "He's starting to believe in something again. Himself, maybe. Or life." Margaret studied her. "Or you." Emily looked away, her cheeks warming. "I didn't come here to be anything more than a caregiver." "Funny thing about life," Margaret said, sipping her tea. "It rarely asks for permission to change your plans." That evening, after dinner, Arthur invited Emily to join him in the study. It was unusual. Their conversations typically happened in the therapy room, short and clinical, or in passing through the garden or halls. This felt intentional. He was seated near the fireplace, a small stack of books beside him, a folder resting on the side table. Emily sat across from him, waiting. "I want to show you something," Arthur said, reaching for the folder. Inside were photos, faded, a little weather-worn. One was of a girl, around 7 or 8, in a field of sunflowers, arms outstretched. "She's beautiful," Emily said. Arthur nodded. "Lily, my daughter." He flipped through a few more. Birthdays, a beach trip, one where she wore a crown made of dandelions. Then he stopped on a picture of a woman. My wife, Celeste. She passed 3 years before the accident. Emily didn't speak. She just listened. They were my whole world, Arthur said, his voice low. And when they were gone, I didn't just lose them. I lost myself. I stopped believing there was anything left worth reaching for. Emily swallowed hard. Grief changes everything. Arthur turned to her. But somehow, these past few weeks, I've started seeing color again. In the garden. In the way the sunlight hits the floors. In the laughter I hear when you talk to Ethan on the phone. He paused. In you. Emily's breath caught. I know I've been difficult. I've pushed you away more times than I can count. But your presence has been the one thing I didn't know I needed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily said softly, You've changed too, Arthur. And not just because you took a step today. You let someone in. That's the bravest step of all. Arthur looked down at his hands. I want to keep going. Keep moving forward. But I'm afraid. So am I, she admitted. But maybe we can figure it out together. He met her gaze, a trace of a smile forming. I'd like that. That night, as Emily walked back to her quarters, she paused by the window. The moon was rising, soft and silver, casting shadows across the garden where Arthur had once refused to go. Now, she could almost picture him walking there, not alone. And maybe, just maybe, not broken. The days that followed Arthur's first steps felt like spring had arrived early inside the Callahan estate. Though winter still clung to the trees outside, something warmer was taking root within the mansion's walls. The change wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, deeply personal. Arthur Callahan had once ruled his empire with calculated precision, isolating himself behind iron gates and thick mahogany doors. But now, the man who once refused help was meeting Emily in the therapy room each morning. Early, eager, and sometimes even smiling. On one particular morning, Emily walked in to find Arthur already doing arm stretches with the resistance bands. You're getting ahead of schedule, she said teasingly. Arthur looked over, breath slightly uneven. I figured I'd surprise you. Maybe even impress you. Emily laughed. Consider me impressed. Let's keep that momentum going. They moved through the exercises, each rep accompanied by quiet encouragement and stolen glances that said more than either of them dared admit. By the end of the session, Arthur was drenched in sweat and sitting taller in his chair. You're pushing harder, Emily observed as she handed him a towel. Because I want more, Arthur said, without hesitation. Not just physically. I want a life again. Emily met his eyes. And what does that life look like? He hesitated. I'm still figuring it out. But lately, it starts with you. A long silence followed, gentle and electric. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps broke the moment. Margaret peeked into the room. Miss Emily, there's someone at the door for you. A young boy. Emily's heart jumped. Ethan? She rushed toward the front entrance. Sure enough, her son stood there bundled in his oversized hoodie, holding a crumpled drawing in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. Mom, he grinned, running into her arms. Ethan, what are you doing here? She asked, laughing as she held him tight. Grandma had to go to the doctor, so she said I could come see where you work. I wanted to meet the grumpy man in the wheelchair. Emily's smile faded. Ethan! Arthur's voice echoed from behind. It's all right. Ethan turned, wide-eyed, as Arthur wheeled forward with a crooked grin. So, you must be Ethan. You really don't have legs? Ethan asked innocently. Arthur chuckled. Oh, I have legs. They just don't always listen to me. Ethan stepped closer. Can you race me? Only if I get a 5-minute head start, Arthur replied. Emily watched, stunned, as her son began chatting with the very man who once refused any connection outside the transactional. Arthur leaned into the conversation, his tone lighter than she had ever heard. Hey, want to see my drawing? Ethan offered, uncrumpling the paper. It's you, my mom, and me. We're all sitting under a tree. Arthur studied it. You've given me a full beard. I like it. Yeah, Mom says it makes you look wise. Emily covered her mouth, laughing. I said distinguished, not wise. Arthur held the drawing carefully, as if it were made of glass. May I keep this? Ethan beamed. Sure. Later that afternoon, Emily sat beside Arthur on the garden bench, while Ethan chased butterflies across the grass. The last of the frost was melting, and the air smelled of damp earth and distant rain. I haven't laughed like that in a long time, Arthur admitted. He's good at that, Emily said, watching her son with quiet pride. He's had to grow up faster than most kids. Arthur nodded. And you've had to carry more than most parents. She glanced at him. I manage. No. You thrive. They sat in silence for a few moments before Arthur spoke again, voice low. I've been thinking about what you asked. What a new life might look like for me. Emily looked over. And? Arthur took a breath. I think it starts with letting go of what I used to be. The power, the control, the fear. He paused, then turned toward her. And maybe, if you'd be willing, with not doing it alone. Her chest tightened. Arthur, I know it's early, and I know I've made more mistakes than I can count. But having you here, watching Ethan laugh, watching you smile, it's reminded me that maybe I'm still capable of being more than what I became after the accident. Emily's eyes glistened. You are. He reached over slowly, his hand finding hers. Then maybe we could figure this new life out together. She squeezed his hand gently. Maybe we already are. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting a golden glow across the house, Arthur called Margaret into his study. Ethan had gone home with his grandmother, and Emily was helping clean the dining area. Margaret, Arthur said, his voice unusually tender. I'd like you to prepare the East Wing guest room. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Expecting company? He smiled. Eventually, but not just any guest. She blinked, then smiled slowly. You really are changing. I hope so, he said, gazing out the window where Emily had just stepped onto the veranda. Because for the first time in a very long time, I want someone to stay. The morning sun filtered through gauzy curtains as Emily arrived at the mansion, Ethan's drawing still folded carefully in her bag. She walked down the familiar hallway, now less intimidating, and found Arthur in the study, poring over a stack of papers with a clarity and calm that hadn't existed before. You're early, he said without looking up, but the softness in his voice gave away his growing affection for her presence. Emily stepped closer. And you're working already? I thought we agreed you'd only worry about physical therapy this week. Arthur smiled, setting the papers aside. This isn't work, not the kind I used to do. These are plans. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Plans? Arthur turned in his wheelchair and gestured toward a file folder. I've been thinking, for years, this house, this company, everything. It existed to preserve power. But now, I want it to mean something. I want to create something lasting, something that gives back. He opened the folder and handed her a document titled The Callahan Foundation for Single Parents and Rehabilitation Initiatives. Emily stared at the title, stunned. You're serious? I am, he said. I know how hard you've worked to provide for Ethan, and I've seen firsthand how many people are out there trying to stay afloat alone. This isn't charity, Emily. It's purpose. Maybe redemption. She looked at him, eyes full of emotion. Arthur, this is beautiful. He gave a small smile. And I want you to help me lead it. What? I don't want to just donate. I want to build something. Programs, housing, scholarships, rehab centers. And I want someone beside me who understands what resilience looks like. Someone like you. Emily's voice trembled. I wouldn't know where to start. But you'd figure it out, he said confidently. You always do. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his trust. I'd be honored. That afternoon, while Arthur reviewed foundation proposals with his legal advisor, Emily found herself wandering into the east wing of the mansion, an area she hadn't visited before. The door to one room was open, and inside, the space had been freshly cleaned, its walls newly painted in soft, calming tones. The furniture was minimal but elegant. On the nightstand sat a small framed photograph, Ethan's drawing. Arthur's voice startled her. Thought maybe you and Ethan might like your own space, if you ever needed it. Emily turned to face him. You prepared this? He nodded. He deserves a safe place to visit his mom, and you deserve more than commuting back and forth every day. Tears welled in her eyes. Arthur, you don't have to. I know, he interrupted, but I want to. For a moment, Emily didn't say anything. Then she stepped toward him, placed her hand gently on his shoulder, and whispered, You have no idea what this means to me. He reached up and took her hand in his. Maybe I do. Later that evening, Arthur invited Emily to dinner. Not in the dining room, but outside, under the string lights he had asked Margaret to help hang earlier that day. The garden, once merely scenic, had been transformed into something out of a dream. Candles flickered along the stone pathway, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, and soft music played in the background from a speaker perched in the window. I didn't know you were the romantic type, Emily teased as he wheeled toward the table set for two. I didn't either, Arthur admitted, but apparently, love makes you learn new things. Emily's heart skipped at the word love, but she didn't shy away. They ate under the stars, laughing more than they had in weeks. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and promise. I never thought I'd get to this place, Arthur said softly, pushing his empty plate aside, where I'd want more than recovery, where I'd dream again. Emily reached for his hand across the table. You're not just dreaming, Arthur. You're living again. He looked into her eyes. And I want to keep living, with you. Silence fell between them, not awkward, but weighty, full. Arthur. I'm scared, she confessed. I've loved and lost, I've fought every day to protect Ethan, and I can't afford another heartbreak. He nodded. I won't promise I won't make mistakes, but I will promise this. I will never let you feel alone in this life again. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled with a smile. Then maybe I'm ready to trust again. They leaned closer, and under the soft glow of the lights and the watching stars above, their lips met, tentative at first, then sure, gentle but deep, with all the things they hadn't dared to say aloud. Later that night, as Emily lay in the guest room with Ethan asleep beside her, she stared at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly life had shifted from survival to possibility. And across the hall, Arthur sat in his study, staring at the same drawing of three figures beneath a tree. He finally understood. The man in the chair didn't need to walk to lead. And love, real love, didn't require perfection. It required courage. Tomorrow, they would continue building something new together. But for now, they had each other, and that was more than enough. A new rhythm had settled into the mansion. The once imposing halls now echoed with something softer. Laughter, footsteps that didn't feel like intrusions, and even the occasional scampering of little feet when Ethan came to visit. Emily had accepted Arthur's offer to lead the Callahan Foundation as its executive director. Though the title felt heavy, she wore it with the quiet strength of someone who'd earned every inch of her path. Each morning, she woke up in the East Wing, where Ethan's framed drawings adorned the walls, reminding her daily of her purpose. And each evening, she and Arthur reviewed plans, policies, and proposals that would touch the lives of families who once lived in shadows like hers. Arthur, for his part, had begun physical therapy with a renewed passion. It wasn't just about regaining strength. It was about reclaiming his identity. No longer was he a man defined by tragedy, but one transformed by love and purpose. That morning, Emily stood at the front steps of the mansion, overseeing a group of young single parents who had come to tour the estate as part of the foundation's first support cohort. Many of them looked uncertain, some even ashamed, as if they weren't sure they belonged in a place so grand. Emily remembered that feeling well. She stepped forward, her voice steady. I know how it feels to stand here, wondering if this is for someone like you. But let me tell you something. This place is because of people like you. Strong, resilient, tired, but still standing. And now, you don't have to do it alone. A woman in the crowd with a baby strapped to her chest wiped away a tear. From the window upstairs, Arthur watched the scene with pride swelling in his chest. His hand, still weak, reached for the armrest of his chair, and with slow determination, he wheeled toward the elevator. He wouldn't miss this moment. Later that day, Emily found Arthur seated on the patio, a journal in his lap, and his glasses perched low on his nose. She approached quietly, her arms crossed, a knowing smile on her face. I saw you peeking out that window earlier, she said. He looked up, feigning innocence. I was simply, admiring the landscaping. She teased, sitting beside him. They were moved by you, even if you weren't the one speaking. Arthur closed his journal. It's you, Emily. You speak from a place most people have forgotten. Honesty, pain, courage. It makes people feel seen. She studied him, searching his eyes. You do the same thing, Arthur. Maybe you just don't notice it yet. He turned to her. Do you ever regret it? What? Coming here, accepting that first job, the bathing, the walls, the strange notes. Emily exhaled slowly, thinking back to the girl who walked in with nothing but desperation in her heart. "No," she whispered, "because I didn't just come here to help you. I came here to find myself again. And I did." Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "Then I think it's time we gave back in a bigger way." Emily opened the paper. It was a proposal, a partnership with the local community center to build transitional housing for single parents and individuals with disabilities. "I want to call it the Ethan Project," Arthur said quietly, "because the world needs more people like him, people who see strength instead of scars." Emily's throat tightened. "You've changed so much," she said, her voice trembling. Arthur took her hand, his grip still shaky but more confident than ever. "You changed me, and I don't ever want to go back to the man I was before you walked through that door." That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Emily walked into the library to find Arthur seated by the fireplace, staring into the flames. She approached, wrapping a soft blanket around his shoulders. "I've been thinking," Arthur said, not taking his eyes off the fire. "I want to start walking, even if it's just a few steps. I want to walk toward you, not just metaphorically." Emily knelt beside him, placing her hand gently over his heart. "You already do, every day. But if you want to walk, really walk, I'll be there every step of the way." Arthur nodded. "Then we start tomorrow." They stayed there, side by side, the firelight dancing on the walls, their silence comfortable, meaningful. The next day, Arthur stood in the therapy room, his hands gripping the parallel bars. Margaret and the physical therapist stood by, but Emily was the one in front of him. Her arms extended slightly, her voice calm and sure. "Just focus on me," she said. "One foot, then the other." Arthur's muscles trembled. Sweat pooled at his brow, but his eyes never left hers. One step, then another. The moment his foot touched the floor, Emily gasped, not in surprise, but in pride. He stumbled, and she caught him, arms steady, heart racing. "You did it," she whispered. "I did it," he echoed, breathless. They stood there, forehead to forehead, suspended between two versions of themselves, the broken and the becoming. "I've never been more alive," Arthur said softly. "And I've never been more grateful," Emily replied, tears streaming freely now. Behind them, Margaret silently wiped a tear of her own, and the physical therapist gave a quiet nod of respect. It wasn't just a step. It was a beginning. And as the sun poured into the room, touching their shoulders like a benediction, they knew this wasn't a miracle. It was the result of love, trust, and the strength they'd found in each other. In the weeks that followed Arthur's first steps, something intangible shifted in the mansion. The air, once heavy with silence and tension, now carried the sounds of movement, gentle laughter, the squeak of therapy equipment, Ethan's energetic footsteps, and the soft rhythm of hope blooming in unexpected corners. Every morning, Emily prepared Arthur's tea as he read the paper in the sunroom, legs gently moving under the table. A new ritual, symbolic and real. She had stopped seeing his wheelchair as a symbol of limitation. Instead, it became a marker of where he had been, not where he was going. Arthur, true to his word, practiced walking every day. The steps were slow, uncertain at times, but they were his. Emily stood beside him in every session, sometimes in quiet encouragement, sometimes in loud celebration. Margaret, once the stern gatekeeper of routine, now smiled more easily, even letting Ethan sneak cookies into the therapy room. One morning, as Arthur stood at the bars, he paused mid-step. "You know," he said, catching his breath, "there was a time when I thought I didn't deserve this. Any of it." Emily met his gaze. "We all have pasts, Arthur, but it's not about what we deserve. It's about what we choose to build from what we've been given." He let those words sit with him, nodding slowly. "Then I'm choosing to build something. With you. For real." Emily smiled, a deep and quiet kind of smile, the kind built from trust hard-earned. That same afternoon, the Callahan Foundation's pilot program officially launched. The garden, once a pristine and empty monument to wealth, was now filled with families. Children ran through the hedges, their giggles bouncing off the marble walls. Single parents shared their stories under canopies. Volunteers offered resources, meals, even therapy consultations. Emily stood at the podium, her hair pulled back, her blouse slightly creased from a morning of chasing Ethan, but her voice clear and strong. "I came here because I had no choice. I stayed because I found purpose. And today, I invite you all to do the same. Not just to accept help, but to believe that rebuilding is possible, even from the deepest pain." The crowd applauded, and as she stepped down, Arthur took her hand. "Do you realize what you've created?" he whispered. Emily looked around. "We created it, Arthur." Later that evening, the house was quieter. The guests had gone, the banners were down, and Ethan had fallen asleep with his head on Margaret's lap, clutching a toy stethoscope, a gift from one of the volunteers who had once been a doctor before their own life unraveled. Arthur and Emily sat in the library, the fire low and flickering. "I have something for you," Arthur said, pulling a small velvet box from his coat pocket. "It's not what you think." Emily raised an eyebrow as she opened it. Inside was not a ring, but a key. She looked at him, confused. "It's the key to the East Wing," he said. "I had it renovated. It's yours now. Not just to live in, but to run the foundation from. Offices, meeting rooms, play areas. I wanted to give you a home inside this home. A space that's yours to grow everything you've dreamed." Emily's breath caught. "Arthur, there was a time I filled this house with things I thought mattered. Paintings, rugs, imported chandeliers, but they never made it feel like a home. You did that. You, Ethan, your laughter, your struggle. That's what made these walls warm again." Emily stood, walked over, and knelt beside him. "You gave me dignity, Arthur. Not because you rescued me, but because you saw me when I didn't even recognize myself anymore." He cupped her face, his touch shaky but tender. "And you gave me life, Emily. You helped me stand, not just on my feet, but as a man." For a moment, they simply stayed there. Two people rebuilt from wreckage, finding peace not in perfection, but in the imperfections they now shared openly. Days later, Emily returned to her old apartment, not to stay, but to collect the last of her things. The space felt smaller now, the air staler. The memories were sharp, but not painful. She packed with quiet gratitude for the life that once felt impossible to escape. Ethan ran to the window. "Mommy, look, there's a rainbow." She smiled. "You're right, baby. There is." Back at the mansion, Arthur waited with Margaret by his side. He stood, gripping his cane, nervous but excited. Today was the day he would walk into the East Wing on his own. Not just as a man healing, but as a partner, a believer, a builder. When Emily returned, she stepped into the foyer and stopped cold. Arthur was walking toward her, step by step. No rails, no help, just a cane and his heart. Emily dropped her bag and ran to him, tears already falling. "You're walking," she whispered, embracing him. "No," he said, his breath catching. "I'm walking toward my future." And in that moment, the mansion wasn't just a house, it was a home, built from courage, sealed in love, and filled, finally, with light. The mansion stood bathed in golden morning light, the dew glistening on the rose bushes outside the east wing. Birds fluttered along the window sill, and a gentle breeze filtered through the open glass doors. Inside, Arthur stood in front of the full-length mirror in the new therapy room. Dressed in a soft navy suit, his cane by his side, and a quiet determination in his eyes. Today was no ordinary day. It marked 1 year since Emily first walked into his world, with uncertainty in her voice and strength in her heart. 1 year since the woman who arrived just to help him bathe had ended up healing far more than his body. She had healed his soul. Downstairs, the house buzzed with a quiet kind of joy. Margaret hummed softly as she arranged flowers in the foyer. Ethan, now 7, ran circles around the dining table, proudly clutching a handmade card in his hand. "Mommy, can I give this to Mr. Arthur now?" he asked eagerly. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart," Emily replied, tying back her hair in a loose knot. She was radiant in a soft ivory dress, simple yet elegant, perfect for the occasion. Arthur had asked her for this morning, just the two of them, before the celebration. No photographers, no audience, just a quiet promise between hearts that had found their way to each other. When she entered the sunroom, Arthur turned slowly to face her. He leaned slightly on the cane, but his stance was strong, sure. "You look beautiful," he said, voice rough with emotion. "And you," Emily smiled, "look like a man who's ready for something big." He chuckled. "I am." She walked to him, standing close. "Arthur, what is all this?" Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Not velvet this time, but crafted from the same cedar that lined the new east wing. He opened it slowly, revealing a delicate ring, simple, but lined with tiny stones that sparkled like stars. "I never thought I'd say this," he began, voice trembling, "but I've found in you something I didn't know I was searching for. Not just healing, not just purpose, but partnership, peace, love." Emily's breath caught as he continued. "You didn't just help me stand again. You taught me how to live and laugh and believe that no matter how broken things seem, they can be rebuilt." So today, I'm not just asking you to stay. I'm asking if you'll walk beside me as my wife. Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks before she even answered. Her hands reached for his, closing gently over the box. "I've already been walking with you, Arthur. But yes, 1,000 times yes." He smiled, eyes glossy. "Then let's make this promise the beginning of everything new." The ceremony that followed in the garden was as intimate as it was unforgettable. Under an archway of white roses and trailing ivy, surrounded by the families from the Callahan Foundation, Lucy, Margaret, and a few dear friends, Arthur and Emily exchanged vows. Ethan stood proudly between them, holding the rings. When asked if he supported their union, he shouted, "Yes, as long as I get to live here forever." Laughter rippled through the garden, and tears weren't far behind. Arthur's voice shook only once when he said, You are the light that entered when my world was darkest. I will never stop walking toward you. Emily's vow was simple, but powerful. You were never the man in the chair to me. You were always the man who chose to rise. As they sealed their promise with a kiss, Ethan cheered, and the gathered guests stood in applause. Not because the scene was perfect, but because it was real, tangible, earned. In the months that followed, Arthur and Emily's life became a balance of purpose and peace. The East Wing officially became the Callahan Renewal Center, a place offering therapy, life coaching, and job assistance for single parents, veterans, and people with physical challenges. Arthur walked more steadily with each week, and though he still used the cane, he wore it with pride, not as a crutch, but as a reminder of what he had overcome. Emily took on a leadership role at the center, mentoring women who, like her, once believed they had run out of options. She told her story without shame, and in doing so, gave others the courage to speak their own truth. And Ethan, he was thriving, drawing, laughing, growing in a home filled with love, stability, and gentle strength. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky a warm apricot hue, the three of them sat on the porch, sipping hot cocoa. "Mom," Ethan asked, "is it weird that I don't remember what it felt like when it was just the two of us?" Emily smiled softly. "It's not weird. It means you've gotten used to having a bigger heart." Arthur looked over, reaching for Emily's hand. "So have I. This story wasn't about wealth or pity. It wasn't about charity or obligation. It was about unexpected healing, about two people, one recovering from physical loss, the other from emotional wounds, who met at the crossroads of survival and chose to walk together toward hope. They found love not in grand gestures, but in small, brave moments. A shared silence, a stubborn step, a hand extended on a hard day, and most of all, they built a life that mattered, not just to themselves, but to everyone they touched. And now it's your turn. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that hope can bloom in the most unlikely places, we invite you to subscribe to the channel. Every click helps us share more stories like this, tales of redemption, love, and resilience that speak to the soul. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of this story stayed with you the most. Your voice matters here. Together, we'll keep building stories that heal. Thank you for watching.